Good afternoon. Welcome to the Bitcoin Bottom Line. I'm your host, Stephen McClurg, with my co-host, Ambassador CJ Wilson of Bitcoin.
Well, thank you, Chartmaster. I appreciate it. It's pretty exciting times right now with everything going on. There's a lot of action in the Bitcoin space. And I'm not attempting to be an ambassador, but I'm just trying to spread some education. So I just got back from Washington, D.C. That was pretty exciting.
No, that's really cool. And I think what's great is you've spent a lot of time with some really key figures, and you're meeting with Ted Cruz. I want to talk about that in a little bit, but you've really become truly an ambassador for Bitcoin to a lot of politicians around the United States, and have been doing a ton of education just out of the love of what you're doing. So why don't we start with Ted Cruz, because that is really fascinating to me, given that I'm from Texas. Mm-hmm. I've been following Ted Cruz, and he just all of a sudden came out with this announcement that he's pro Bitcoin. And there's a new announcement that just came out as well. So I'd like to hear how that interaction started and what it's led to.
Yeah. So I think sometime in June, we ended up having a Zoom call with Ted or Senator Cruz, I guess technically as an ambassador, I should be formal about that, right? And he seemed to really like one key element of what's happening in Texas, and that's that people are moving to Texas because of Bitcoin. As a Texas senator, obviously, he's very incentivized to have Texas be a successful state. And I think he saw or sees a little bit of the failure of Silicon Valley in a lot of ways to deliver on their promise of freedom and, kind of developing technology that's going to improve people's lives, and sees that as I guess in a lot of ways now, a limiting factor. So with a bunch of the mining that's happening in Texas, with like the Windstone facility growing, Riot's building a huge facility there. There's another company that's really big there as well, but Unchained Capital's there, which I go visit a lot because they have the BitDevs meetup. There's just a lot of like sort of things that are happening in and around Bitcoin between the Texas Blockchain Association and just, Texas Bitcoiners being really, I think Texans in general, having lived there for about 10 years, they really just want to do their own thing. And that's much like parallel with what Bitcoin really is. So Ted sees an opportunity to kind of take Texas up a level. Especially considering that states like New York make it so difficult to be a Bitcoiner with the bit license and some of these things like that. So he's pushing for it, right? Governor Abbott has signed some legislation into place. And so when I was in DC, I had a follow-up with Senator Cruz's office. And one of the things that they talked about was this program called Accept, which is where they're actually trying to push Bitcoin as a currency to be used during small cash transactions, which is really great because it's the initial impetus for Bitcoin a long time ago was to use for everyday expenses. So they're actually going to, I think, try to put it on vending machines or something like that, which is pretty bonkers. But I read about that yesterday, and I had been sort of sworn to secrecy on that, but now that it's out, I guess I can talk about it. But I think it's a great thing. As more people use Bitcoin, as more people are dollar cost averaging into it, it just proves to be a better and better asset for everybody that's involved.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about this a lot where, I typically try to hodl Bitcoin, but I also like to spend it. And one of the reasons why I like to spend it is because I want to actually promote the ecosystem. It's useful if people are actually using it for a transaction. We're recording this on November 1st. Yesterday was the 13th anniversary of the Satoshi white paper, right? And the title of it is Peer-to-Peer Electronic Cash. It's meant to be spent peer-to-peer. It's meant to be electronic cash. It's meant to be borderless. So if we're utilizing it in that way, that's probably the fastest way to get adoption.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a huge element of, I hate to say this, but celebritizing certain things, and that draws attention. So another example of that is when you have Senator Cynthia Lummis going out there and talking about this in staff meetings or in, on the Senate floor, when she's basically grilling Janet Yellen about inflation and, yield curve control and these types of things. And she literally said the other day, "Thank God for Bitcoin." And it was like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. It was great. But yes, so then also along with that, Aaron Rodgers, dressed as John Wick, says, "Hey, I'm going to take some of my salary in Bitcoin. Send me your Cash App Sats tag. I'll, send you some Sats or whatever." So I was like, I am not above asking for free Bitcoin. Like, I will absolutely do it. And then I owed somebody money for lunch the other day, so I sent them money in Bitcoin, right? It was $20, so I sent them $20 worth of Bitcoin through Cash App. And these types of things, this is how you promote the ecosystem. I think that's what it is. And once people see that, and they see that oh, it's just like this other thing or something that they've already used before, it doesn't become as intimidating. Because I think I was actually, the reason why I was a little bit late was I was actually orange billing a client of mine, because he's like, yeah, I've got all this cash, I'm waiting for everything to crash, but I don't know what to do. I'm like, have you talked about Bitcoin mining before? And I was like, here you go. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these Senate offices are very interested in it. And I
Yeah.
think the hardest battle that we have in general, people like yourself and myself that are out there just promoting Bitcoin, um, we don't want it to be a partisan issue where like only, conservatives are into it, right? We do see the value of both sides having access to Bitcoin, because everybody literally does have access to Bitcoin, even bad guys, which is, I think, one of the big issues that a lot of them have. But having met with Congress reps and Senate reps from California, Ohio, Colorado, Wyoming, Texas, North Carolina. Let's see who else we have on that list. There's been a lot of really good feedback, I think, from people that attended the event. But basically, what happened was Alex Gladstein from the Human Rights Foundation and I did an event for Cynthia Lummis and Cinema, who have the Financial Innovation Caucus. So they put us in a room and we're talking to these people. We had like 4 or 5 dozen people there from various committees and stuff like that. And afterwards, they came up to us and they're like, "Oh, that was really good." Alex talks about the freedom of Bitcoin in oppressed places, right? People that have dirt floors and triple digit inflation, and how Bitcoin can save those people. And I'm talking about it from a small business angle, as someone who doesn't really see the value of holding a bunch of cash in the company's reserves. It doesn't really make sense to me anymore when I can hold Bitcoin. So it was really engaging, honestly. It was a lot of young people asking really good questions. And what I didn't realize is that every Senate office has like dozens of people that work for them, right? They've got like 20 to 80 people per office. And I was kind of like, whoa, okay. Once you go there, you realize, go there to DC, you realize how big the machine really is. And also how that machine is able to digest these things like the infrastructure bill or the Green New Deal, where they have thousands of pages they've got to really sift through. And it is very interesting. But for the most part, I think what's going to happen is some of these states are really going to take advantage of the fact that the states themselves can take the lead. And the states themselves can set, tax incentives and things like that, like with what Wyoming is doing right now for mining. People are going to go there to mine because there's tax incentives now to decrease the flaring of methane by mining off of that instead.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because I met Senator Lomas about 4 years ago when there was a lot happening in Wyoming. And to be fair, Wyoming really was square one for states creating their own legislation, building an ecosystem. And Wyoming really was the first one to do it. And she was at the forefront of that all along. So it's really cool to see what's happened since then. But she's fantastic. I mean, she's really got fire in her belly and really wants to promote this thing. I think it's fantastic. But Texas is interesting, right? Like I said, I was born and raised there. You lived there for a period of time. You're actually probably the perfect guy to speak to some of the senators and from Texas and the governor for Texas, because we made this joke privately a few weeks ago. When I said anybody will listen to a former Ranger. Only thing better than a Ranger is a cowboy, right?
Yeah.
So you're the perfect guy. I mean, you're gonna get into the room. Texans are going to listen to you, and you're right. When it comes to oil production, and the way that it actually works, a lot of people don't realize this, but when you're pulling oil out of the ground, when you have oil, you also have natural gas as a byproduct that's sitting there in the ground that's going to seep out anyway, which is a lot of what's being flared. And there's just no way. There's so much of it. There's no way to actually use it. And if that can actually be utilized into mining, then you're accomplishing two things at once. It's really a great way to utilize something that's just going to waste anyway.
Yeah, I mean, after we had Christy Lee on our podcast a couple months ago, I guess, I really started digging in deeper to the natural gas mining stuff, because I felt like with the overabundance of natural gas, there's a lot of places, whether it's Pennsylvania, Wyoming, some places in, obviously
Dakotas.
all over in Texas. Yeah, Dakotas. There comes this trade-off where, you can't really expect to build a power plant, a large power plant in some of these areas, because it just isn't feasible. There's no reason to have a big power plant there because you don't have a lot of people. So in a way, the sort of density, the low density, like production zones are so ripe for natural gas to be converted, because when you do flare natural gas, it doesn't really burn off at 100% ratio, right? So when you're running through a turbine or machines or whatever, I know Greg Foss is obviously, I think when we were at Bitcoin 21,
Miami.
Miami, we were all talking about that, and I got this crazy idea. I was like, dude, I should do this and do that or whatever, and it started spinning the wheels in my head a little bit. And I think overall there's going to be a long, I would say, runway of increased hash rate that's coming online in America in various places. I mean, there's people in Bakersfield right now that is south of me about 100 miles, and they're actually taking, because Bakersfield's like a big dairy production area, they're taking the cow poop and they're taking the methane out of the cow poop and they're Bitcoin mining off the cow poop.
That's insane. But by the way,
great.
Bakersfield is also a big oil production site as well. A lot of people don't realize that.
Right. In California, they've sort of demonized the use of gas or anything. But the reality is that I think there's a lot of FUD around natural gas, but we cook with it in our houses, so it can't be that bad. I mean, granted, it's got to be cleaned and scrubbed and things like that to make sure there's no H2S or some of these other negative things in it. Right. But I think once you start to align the incentives between the agricultural industry, the energy industry, and Bitcoin together, you see that there's like there's a building block there where you can sort of modernize the grid, or at least the financial incentive structure, so that you have a lot of people there. And when you have these conversations with, like senators or congressmen, I mean, like Warren Davidson gets it. He's probably in Congress. He's the easiest person to point at and say, this guy literally understands it A to Z better than anybody, because he says stuff like, oh, well, America was there for, airplanes, the internet, cell phones. Like, it's like, okay, yeah, he understands that this is what we're trying to do. And I think there's a huge incentive for any senator or congressman to bring this into their district. And you see River Financial, which is a Bitcoin company from the Bay Area, they opened up an office in, I think, Columbus or something like that. So it's like, okay, well, if you have a friendly senator, a friendly governor, a friendly, like Suarez down in Miami, you have a friendly jurisdictional aspect, then you're going to see companies moving to those places, because it's like, it just makes sense. And just like NASCAR kind of centralizing in North Carolina, you're going to see these small pockets where it's incentivizing you to go to those places. And for me, I mean, as a mining business, I'd want my mining business to be in Wyoming or Texas right now, because I just see that as the most stable in terms of the alignment is there. There's so much alignment from all the different, government people. And it's a great conversation. It's very exciting. I think by the time we get to the actual midterm election cycle in 2022, definitely by the 2024 presidential cycle, you're going to see these people like have to debate this, openly, and come out as pro Bitcoin, because if they don't, it's going to be just as bad as some of these other social issues that they've either come out against or for in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you talk about Texas and Wyoming. Both are very much, everybody's independent, do what you want, freedom. Both of them are very interested in developing the Bitcoin mining ecosystem and bringing companies in, and both have politicians from those two states that are very eager to embrace it. And you're right; those are probably the two most. They're probably the states with the biggest ability to actually do mining in from the excess energy that's created. And then you have other states like Ohio. And by the way, you talk about Warren Davidson. Not only is he probably one of the smartest politicians out there, I would put him head to head with almost any intellectual in the TradFi or Bitcoin or blockchain space. Mm-hmm. And he really knows what he's talking about. He's well studied, very intelligent. And anytime I have a conversation with him, I'm completely blown away with his knowledge of regulation, and which is, by the way, he's the perfect person to be on the finance committee, regulating the regulators, right? Because he actually takes the time to understand the regulations and the laws, probably more so than most securities attorneys. And so, being from Ohio, I'd be really curious to see if a lot more businesses go into Ohio.
Right. I think, one of the things that we talked about with some of the other states that we were meeting with, especially Colorado, I think they're incentivized to sort of use that connection, that physical connection, that conduit of, if you imagine Wyoming and Texas sort of being on this axis of awesome, or axis of ASICs. Okay.
Right. I
That
like the
you
awesome though.
Yeah, axis of awesome is cool too.
Yeah.
Then you could see Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Oklahoma has a lot of natural gas too. You could see that regionalizing that Bitcoin friendliness in that area, and really trying to, from an energy production standpoint, trying to maximize that, because you have a lot of these. If we look at, like, if America was the world, right, then you have your superpowers within America. You have California, you have Florida, Texas, you have I would say New York, maybe Massachusetts, and maybe Illinois, sort of these sort of keystone states in a lot of policy decisions, just for whatever reason, right? So as you see these other states get a little jealous, they're like, man, Wyoming's getting a lot of play right now. Like, man, Texas is really, like, we need to get there. You can't necessarily annex another state, right? You can't just go out there and, like, go to war with another state and say, like, the way that has been happening in Europe for the last, whatever, 250 years. So what you have to do is you have to find a way, like you're saying, to court businesses to your state. And you do that through tax incentives, or you do that through business incentives, or you do that through, energy costs at this point. And I think if states take advantage of the energy production, or they invest in that energy infrastructure, you're going to have people that want to, buy your electricity. It's just, there's too much of that there. And with all these virtual businesses or virtual workplaces, you could kind of headquarter a business almost anywhere these days, if there's a reason to do that. So, Wyoming has the Speedy Bank charter options and stuff like that. But if you see other states sort of adopt that or adapt to that, then yeah, you're going to see those states go, and then everybody that comes in behind them is just going to push them up. It's going to be the rising tide, but the rising tide is going to lift those other boats faster because they were there first. And that's sort of the benefit of Bitcoin. And I think if some states that have, let's say, excess energy or something like that, why don't they just mine Bitcoin themselves, right? And put it in the state sovereign fund, so that the state can have their own kind of capital to do their own thing. And I think Wyoming or Alaska could potentially do that, right? Like actually do that.
Yeah, they
but
can.
yeah.
I mean, some of the richer states. I mean, Alaska is very resource heavy, and they even write checks to people just for living there, from their excess and natural resources. Tennessee, where I live, is actually has a massive budget surplus right now, and can bring a lot of companies in at the moment. The problem is there's not enough housing to house everybody, because everybody's moving here. But Tennessee is one of the small states. It's sort of like Ohio. They're both pretty small. But and I've spent time with several of the politicians that are here in Tennessee, and they're very pro business. They're very pro Bitcoin. I was at a luncheon with Bill Hagerty, the governor, and he is very positive on fintech and on Bitcoin. I spoke with Marsha Blackburn, the senator from Tennessee, about 2 weeks ago, and she is very hardcore pressing Bitcoin, and has actually made some pretty big announcements in the last couple of weeks as well. And then one of the reasons why we set up business here was because of Tim Hagerty, who was former ambassador, now senator from Tennessee, who has been very publicly saying that we've got to get behind Bitcoin, and that was about a year ago. So no, these people are really pushing hard, and it seems like you've got, like you said, there's the axis of awesome, or the what that does all the mining, which is going to be really Wyoming and Texas, and then you have Florida, Tennessee, and then I think Ohio too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Given Warren Davidson's knowledge and pool and stance on the subject, I think those are really the three next states, and of course we're seeing a lot of people moving their headquarters into Miami, both traditional finance but also blockchain.
Yeah, I think, as we start to see, I guess the best way to put it is how you said, you want to pay people small amounts of Bitcoin to sort of redistribute, right? So that's our version of like you know that you need to pay something. So if you get it to one other person that's never been a Bitcoiner, then you're growing the network and you're growing the strength of that network every time we do that, right? So as these other states come up, suddenly they're at the same table and they're now leading. And because with the Senate is much different than the House, right? The Senate is 2 people per state, regardless of the size of the state. So when you have Feinstein, or Padilla from California, they don't really have any more power than Cruz or Cornyn or Lummis or Blackburn or any of these other senators, right? And so that's really where you just need to get a critical mass of senators that are sort of on that thing. And I think if you put Bitcoin in the middle of the table, then you can kind of fold both sides together and say, hey, let's all get behind this, because this is something that can lead us, as a country now. And because the states are going to take advantage of the fact that they can be a pro Bitcoin state. That's going to bring people in. And so then once there's a region of a states that get together, because these guys are all buddies, they're all friends, or they're all enemies, one way or the other. They all work together, they see each other all the time. It's like when I was playing baseball and I knew the guys from Oakland, I knew the guys from San Diego, I knew the guys from Houston. I knew those guys because I played against them or whatever, whether it was the minor leagues or the majors or they were ex-teammates. So you have to get like this, you have to back away a little bit and say, all right, what's best for my state? And the senators and the governors are going to drive that. And then what's best for the country? And then, that's where it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get more people on board, because I think you have this FUD that's been put out there for 10 years, but we're seeing that FUD gradually get peeled away. So recently, I would say, let's say maybe a year ago, when you were talking to people about this, even high level people, like high level government officials or corporate officials, trying to like orange pill somebody that's a CEO or something like that, they would say something like, oh, well, I read this thing that it's going to use all the energy in the world. And it's like, all right, well, that's a lie. Or I read that China owns everything and China bans Bitcoin. So it's like, we've seen, if the FUD stays there long enough, it just falls off the page. It can't stay relevant for long enough. And as you see these different financial caucuses or the Senate Banking Committee or whatever, as they start to kind of grasp this, they start to talk with each other, and then you'll see 10 of them that are on this committee together, and they'll adopt it. 9 out of the 10 states that are on that committee will adopt it. And I think that's what's going to drive it forward and make Bitcoin really an American thing, and make America the best place to be a Bitcoiner, which is like kind of the mission of us going out there. I know for you as well, getting involved with people, you don't necessarily want to just export your life and go to Barbados or something like that. Like you enjoy the brick and mortarness of America, as I do. So we might as well try to do everything we can. And then reality is, and this is the sort of unspoken truth amongst Bitcoiners that really take a step back with perspective, by 2024, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, Bitcoin is going to be potentially $1 million a coin or something like that. And it's not going to matter at that point, right? Because the people that have Bitcoin, significant amounts of Bitcoin, will be elevated, beyond where they're at now by a big margin. And hopefully that's as many people as possible, because we're trying to get the message out there that Bitcoin's a good thing. But that's really, I think we have about 6 or 7 years critically of these election cycles and things like that to make sure that you don't have an uneducated senator or uneducated committee making completely ridiculous rules that literally like hamper American prosperity. I think that's the big problem.
Yeah. Well, let's spend a little bit of time, and I want to hear about your trip to DC, where you sat in front of the Senate Finance Committee, right?
Well, yeah. So we did. There was we had representatives from the House and the Senate. I'm trying to think of the right, like all the committees and stuff like that. There was the Financial Innovation Caucus is the one that we were there with. But then there was also people from the House Banking Committee, the Senate Finance Committee, Senate Banking Committee. We had a bunch of different people. I got like a whole roster of people that were there. And really, Chris Land, who is from Wyoming, he's one of Lummis's staff. He's been, I think, one of the leaders in terms of producing legislature for the Speedy Bank Charter and things like that. So he was asking us some questions, some kind of softball questions that we were able to sort of run with, and then we had questions from the crowd. And I think one of the big ones was, how do we prevent bad actors, from using this? And the response from Alex and I was similar, which was, hey, listen, cash is always going to be the most untraceable bad actor use case, right? So that's the reality. And if 0.05% of Bitcoin transactions are used by bad guys or whatever, then that's still going to be lower than cash, which could be as high as 20%. So, I think in that regard, the message that we wanted to deliver on a bipartisan basis was, number one, and this is what I always say, that the financial ladder, right? It's very slippery at the bottom, and you're trying to climb out of poverty. That bottom rung is so slippery because we're put into these buckets, such as banking, traditional banking, where if you don't have $10,000 or $20,000 in an account, they're charging you a monthly maintenance fee. And that monthly maintenance fee adds up so much that it really becomes hard to save. And if you're not able to save, and your money is getting to devalued at the same time, then you really are pretty hopeless to climb out of poverty. And so we try to deliver that message, as an American message. And then also, small businesses would be so much better off using Lightning Network channels than using Visa at the end of the day. The sort of proliferation of these vampire companies that are draining us as small business owners on a gross basis from payroll, payment rails, service providers, and stuff like that. You're paying all those people as the cost of doing business before you're ever able to really turn a profit. They take money before you even are able to pay your employees. They take money right as soon as someone swipes. So communicating that, and then I guess going through the follow-up process is a little bit new for me, but basically trying to get as many people as possible. Thank God that everybody, their email address is pretty easy to discern. You can sort of first name dot last name at whatever. So we're able to reach back to a lot of these people and say, hey, we've got one of our other teammates is going to be there this week. If you want to follow up questions, here's a PDF with some resources. Here's a video from Swan called This Machine Greens. Here's a link to Michael Saylor talking to Ross Stevens. Here's the book from Jimmy Song. And so we gave them an entire list of things to follow up with on their own, because it is kind of essential that people do their own research in a lot of ways. Because if you just try to cram all you've been in Bitcoin probably, if not as long as me, longer than me. If you take all the knowledge that you've accumulated from traditional finance and Bitcoin and you try to implant that into somebody in 90 minutes, there's just not going to be enough time. It's too dense. And so they need more time to really go through it. And so I think that it's going to be a long process. I think going out there multiple times, talking to people, following up, getting direct messages on Twitter from people, and just kind of keep the ball rolling. But as you have the Davidsons and the Lummises and the Cruzes and these people coming forward and going out with it, it's going to be pretty positive, I think, for the growth of the space.
Well, and like you said, it's all about jobs too, right? It's, if you can attract jobs to your district or jobs to your state, then you're going to get reelected. That's the easiest way to get reelected, is your state is doing well. Yeah. So what do you have to do to attract those jobs? I mean, that's really the message, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Valkyrie, we opened up in Nashville. We're hiring people in Nashville. We're bringing people in with good paying jobs, and that's benefit enough right there. Same thing with Austin, Texas. Same thing with Miami. I mean, these are places where people are coming and they're getting work. Cheyenne, all of these places are attracting people and attracting jobs, and it's really the best path to reelection.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that hits home really hard with all of these people, and I think the challenge is in states like California, when I'm talking to people from California, whether it's, my Congress district is Devin Nunes, or it's Feinstein's office or something like that, explaining that driving the cost of electricity down is going to drive productivity up even further, right? Because one of the biggest hampers that we have here, the biggest blocks that we have to sustainability in a lot of ways, is the price of electricity. And part of the problem with that is they keep coming off, they keep taking certain types of energy offline. They take water, and they dump it into the ocean. So when you're talking about power as a resource, power produces jobs the same way that water produces food, right? So if you're a farming community and you have excess water, you're going to grow more food, which is bountiful, right? So you have bountiful amounts of food. You're able to sell that to more people. You're hiring more people to work there. You're ensuring that those people's kids can get to go to school because there's stability. And when you have instability from these different regimes or different, let's say, more whimsical things are blowing in on the wind, oh, we're going to do this type of thing, we're going to do that type of thing, and the budget's kind of seesaw all over the place, it doesn't invite people to want to start businesses in the state that weren't already there. You have people like me that are sort of entrenched as a Californian now at this point. I can't really pick up a car dealership and like roll it to Nevada, but if I had a tech company, there'd be very little incentive to keep me here given the current state of business. Doesn't mean that the current state of business is could get better, because it can. And if it got better, then it would re-attract people to California. But I think at some point, there's going to be a more, I would say, homogenous distribution of people in terms of a density standpoint, because you're going to see these other less dense areas start to get more dense as they sort of normalize the services that are possible in an area that's maybe a little bit more rural or something like that. Because if you can have, I think, the high quality of life, then why would you want to have a high cost of living? Like, you'd always want to chase the lowest cost of doing business and the lowest cost of living, as opposed to the, if the metric evens out with highest quality of life. And I think that's something that some states are really starting to figure that out. And hey, your money goes a lot farther in Ohio, your money goes a lot farther in Nashville, so why stay in Chicago? I mean, like, using Chicago as like a third party, like, why would anybody live there or do business there if they didn't have to? You know what I mean? When you could go to Nashville and do business for cheaper, live for cheaper, have better weather, way better regulations, way better way better business environment, and way better safety, I guess, in a lot of ways. So this is what I see sort of happening, and it's going to be a multi-year cycle, because some people are going to unwind their businesses or wind them down, and then they're going to start them up somewhere else. Because if you're an entrepreneur, you just want to chase that anyways. You always want to be going after something. It's just part of your personality. But I think the digital asset space is like one of the few places that has so much room to run, so much room to grow across the board, like you guys are growing.
Yeah. Well, one of the problems that I've identified, I think a lot of other people have identified as well, is all these states that we're talking about that people are moving to for innovation are Republican controlled states. And it seems to be a bit of a lack of effort in the Democratic Party. There seems to be a lot of people that are running for office in primaries against older Democrats that are a little bit more pro innovation, pro Bitcoin, pro fintech. But it seems like the old guard is really staunchly against it, minus a few people, right? I mean, you've got, the more famous people like Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang, who isn't officially an elected official, but he's a politician. He's well known and carries a lot of weight, right? But outside of those two, I really haven't come across other Democrats that are really interested in sitting down and learning and trying to figure out how they can make their states better by embracing innovation. Have you experienced anything different there?
I mean, I would say that so far it's been mostly conservative people that have come into the meeting with knowledge of what it is and what it does, meaning what Bitcoin can do for their state or their region. I think the challenge is that in general, like, if we're gonna stereotype, you would say that UBI and fiscal conservation are sort of on opposite ends of the spectrum, right? And if you're going to put Democrats on one side, they're definitely going to be more towards UBI. And I don't mean like an actual paycheck on a monthly basis like you get in Alaska, or what maybe Andrew Yang has proposed. I just mean on a general sense of they're leaning more towards money printing as a result of wanting to help more people and wanting to do more social programs, whereas Republicans, typically GOP candidates or entrenched politicians, are generally more about, hey, let's not screw this up, let's not blow money, let's make sure that we're very conservative financially about this stuff, and that we're willing to deal with pain. Whereas the Democrats sometimes aren't as willing to deal with pain. And so when you have those two opposing sides to an issue, I think Bitcoiners are definitely more willing to deal with the pain and the austerity required to increase your wealth. They're willing to do the work. They're willing to sort of sustain a little bit less opulence, or whatever you want to call it, while they're converting their life over to more of a Bitcoin standard. And I think that the challenge is relating to the Democratic and progressive candidates that, hey, like, this might actually help you, and Erica Rhodes obviously is running for District 30 in California against Brad Sherman, who's really anti-Bitcoin, and Erica's pro-Bitcoin. So we obviously hope that Erica has gets a chance to move forward and get her voice heard. I think she's looking at it in a sense that like, yeah, financial like literacy is not taught at all in schools. It's something that is very lacking, and it creates a lot of holes in the economy going down the road because people make all these bad decisions, and then they hamstring themselves with bad credit or bankruptcies or defaults or whatever. And Bitcoin is sort of an anti-default technology, because it's like it's such a good form of capital that if you have to, you can sell it generally for more than you bought it for, if you can just hold on to it for long enough. And that could bail you out of a fiscal problem. Whereas like if you're continually depending on people giving you stuff in order for you to survive, if you're not upskilling yourself, then you might not be as valuable as the person next to you, and in terms of a wage. And I think that's the one thing that you see there's this gap that I don't know if we can close that gap in the next year or two. But I think definitely in the next 3 years we could probably close that gap of awareness, just to say, hey, listen, like as more people demand to get paid in Bitcoin, then you're going to even out that social disparity, that economic disparity, because as these people who never really had power or were always sort of trapped in a social program, now they don't need that social program anymore, so they can focus their attention on personal growth or parenting or whatever it is that they want to do. And that's a higher quality of life than like standing in line, effectively, which is what I equate being super dependent on social programs. And it's something that you don't want for anybody. You don't want anybody to be having to wait in line for a third of their life or a tenth of their life or whatever it is in order to get basic needs. But at the end of the day, like it's very hard to measure and explain to people that there has to be an accountability during the education process. And I think people like Erica take a really good look at this, because they say, hey, if we teach people young enough that they need to be fiscally responsible and how to work this, and we show them how not to fall for certain types of advertising, basically the way I look at it, then they'll be able to start their 20s and 30s under much different circumstances and much more beneficial circumstances.
No, that's great. Well, CJ, I look forward to the next time we get together, and good luck out there. Thank you for all your work. This is Bitcoin Bottom Line signing off.